Welcome back to Careers Explained. This week, we're talking with Ben Simonds about his career path and current role as an executive recruiter at Spencer Stuart. Welcome, Ben, and thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, Heidi. Really happy to be here.
Can you start by giving us an overview of kind of your major stepping stones on the way to your current role?
Yeah, I would be happy to. I guess I'll start with I went to Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. Grew up in Maine, so just a few miles up the road from where I grew up. Went to high school, and I studied psychology. Always been interested in people, how people think, and became interested in the sort of science behind that, and thought that a psychology degree would apply well to a range of different careers because I still wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do at that point. And went to Bowdoin, got that degree, ended up at applying for different human capital and leadership consulting roles, and ended up finding out about Spencer Stuart. Um, for those of you who don't know, Spencer Stuart is a leadership advisory and executive recruiting firm, working with businesses to help address their leadership and talent needs. And I ended up getting in conversation with Spencer Stuart, ended up joining the company, first role out of college, and I've been here ever since.
Awesome. And then at that point where you've decided on psychology as a major, you know what types of roles you're interested in. Can you describe why you were looking for this role and how that fit into your interests?
Yeah, it's been an interesting story actually because most of my work around psychology and the way I was thinking about it as a career was centered around research in academia or even psychiatric research. It was, I did a fellowship at Bowdoin for research in developmental and social psychology. I worked at Maine Medical Center, the Maine Medical Center Research Institute, working with their psychosis research team. And so, I thought that that was going to be my path for a while, but once I'd done enough of that work, I sort of realized that my interest in people was, not really being met by the day to day of that work. I found it for me to be more about a lot of reading literature, a lot of writing, data analysis, and I just wanted something a little more face to face, a little more interactive on a day to day basis. And so, having conversations with career counselors and different people at my network, I sort of learned about human capital consulting, which felt people oriented both in an overarching sense, which is where the psychology interest came from, but also in the day to day, really meeting people every day and both internally and with clients and candidates. It's a really people oriented role every day. And so once I sort of learned about that and became focused on that as a potential career path, that's how I found out about Spencer Stuart being a well-known company in that space, and the rest is went through that process and ended up at the company. So it's been an interesting story for sure.
Yeah, I love that you started thinking maybe like academia, maybe working in a hospital with kind of patients, and then switch to more of the corporate application of psychology. And good to get all of those experiences so you actually knew what you wanted before leaving the nest of college. And then you mentioned the process to get there. Can you walk through what it was like to apply to Spencer Stuart, what kind of the interview and the prep entailed for you?
Yeah, I would be happy to. So I applied directly through their website. At the time they were hiring analysts, and that's sort of the entry level role that most people would be joining with. And send in my resume and cover letter, everything that comes with the sort of standard application process. And then first interview was sort of a screening phone call with a recruiter, mostly high level questions about, my background, my interest in the role, also a few check boxes with logistics like timing and location and whatnot. And then from there, it was a couple round of behavioral interviews, including one with the hiring manager for the role. And I prepared for that with a lot of practice, a lot of practicing the typical types of questions that might come up in a behavioral interview, problem solving, dealing with failure, approaching to learning new skills, working through conflicts, things like that. And Really worked on practicing those, getting feedback from different sources as I was preparing for those conversations, and also making sure I'm coming to those questions or those interviews with questions, demonstrating that I'm engaged with this process. I'm really interested in learning more about the role in the company. And then from there, luckily, I didn't have to do a live case study. We actually had a homework assignment, so we had like a week to work on it, which was a lot better for me.
I would prefer
Um,
that too.
yeah. And so we had like a PowerPoint topic that we had to make a PowerPoint on a topic that was given to us, and really just testing for our ability to learn a new area, articulate information, and create client-friendly deliverables. And so, went through that part of it. And then the sort of final rounds were with my would-be managers, who are my managers now. So our office manager, but also the analyst director. So that's really checking for, more like cultural alignment and stylistic fit. But the interesting part about the process was, you're applying as an analyst generally, and this won't always be the case at Spencer Stuart or in executive recruiting firms like Spencer Stuart, but I applied as a complete generalist. And once I got offered and accepted the offer to the firm, after that, there were still several conversations with different leaders in the company to figure out what practice I would end up as a part of. So I met with, people from our board's practice, people from our human resources practice, our legal and compliance practice, and ended up getting placed in our technology, media, and telecommunications practice where I sit now. So even after you get offered the role, at least in my process, there's still a lot of conversation and almost interviewing to be had to figure out where exactly you'll land in the organization.
And was that something that, especially the second part where you're in as a generalist, now it's time to specify which group? Did you know your options? Did you look into that, or was it really a discovery through the interview?
Yeah, it was really discovered through the interview. I mean, I had ideas of what I might be interested in, but we have so many different practices at a firm like Spencer Stuart, where as opposed to a boutique firm that's really focused on maybe one industry or one function or one geography, we're really broad, and we have practices in across industries, across different functions, and so I came in with maybe ideas of where I would have liked to land, but ultimately it was the conversations that I had with those various leaders were not just for them to figure out where they think I should be, but also for my own, like, oh, this one sounds more interesting to me. This one might be less of a fit. It's almost like a dating process trying to figure out where you're going to end up in the end.
Absolutely. And you got matched up and you're still there. So it sounds like it's a great first date. You're good at first date. And what does an executive recruiter do? Can you tell us about your specific role?
Yes. So I am an executive recruiter. Internally, my role would be senior analyst. So it's a little bit different positioning how I would put it internally versus externally.
Mm.
But my role is really centered around being responsible for the research and project management of my projects. And the projects that I work on are typically searches, is what I would call it. So a client has hired us to help them find a new executive, be it a CEO or a board director or a C-level executive. We are helping them fill that new role or, put somebody in that role that they would like to be filled. And my primary responsibility is, supporting the success of the search by identifying potential candidates for the role, helping create, the detailed job descriptions that we use, developing our search strategy. So what types of companies, what types of people and backgrounds we're going to be looking for, and also managing the project, ensuring a smooth process overall, making sure that client deadlines and needs are all met. As you spend a little bit more time at the firm coming in at an entry level, you also begin to play a role in, prospecting and doing some of the initial outreach and screening of potential candidates for these roles. So, speaking on the phone with candidates about the role, asking questions about their background and sharing information about the position and then making recommendations to the team on if that person might be a fit for the role or not. And so, it becomes a little more involved as you spend a little more time at the firm, but overall responsible for the research and project management of each of my searches.
And what did the training look like for that, especially on the research side of how do you go about looking for candidates?
Yeah, it's actually at Spencer Stuart a very good, rigorous training process. Um, in the beginning, we had what they called a boot camp, which was 2 weeks of back-to-back sessions, team intros, working sessions, doing basically working with other new analysts to create some of the deliverables that you're going to be working on once you really get started in the job. And it's a really good process, a really good learning process in the beginning. And then once you're through that, it's sort of a slow ramp up to, allow time to integrate, develop your skills, and begin taking on a little bit more work as you can scale up your workload more efficiently. But, I came in with I didn't study business. I didn't know anything about the tech industry. I came in with really no background knowledge in how any of this works. And it's a lot of trial and error. And the great thing about that is there's space to grow. There's a lot of feedback. Many people at the firm are willing to provide feedback and help you learn, provide mentorship. And so there's a lot of space and time to learn, ask questions, and a lot of resources and support to, sort of get through that initial learning curve. But yeah, I mean, it's a trial and error for sure.
You get your 2 weeks of intensive group
Yeah,
training, then still some hand-holding and questions after that. Training wheels before you are sent off on your own.
yeah, exactly.
And then how do those roles that you described break down into a typical day or week for you?
Yeah, so normally I'll be working on several different roles at once, and each will have different needs that day or that week. And so, typical day, I might write a job description for a CEO search that we've just recently kicked off. And then I might spend some time, researching new potential candidates for a chief technology search, either by, looking at current or former chief technology officers at other relevant companies, or looking at similar assignments that we've done to that one in the past and seeing if there are any other candidates that have been on those searches that might be a fit for this one. I'll probably have a meeting or two with my internal teams to prepare for an upcoming client call where we sort of update the client on our progress. I might help make a slideshow presentation for a consultant to use when they're pitching to, hopefully do a new role for a client. And then I may have a call or two with a potential candidate for another role that I might be working on. So pretty active and trying to touch each of my searches every day in some capacity just to make sure that, I'm on top of everything that I'm working on.
Hands on everything each day. And how many projects are you usually managing at one time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess the first thing I'd say is it really ebbs and flows, and really dependent on, market conditions. When tech was booming, say last year, or in 2021 even, our practice was really busy and I was working on, maybe 12 to 15 searches at once just because we were so busy. And then tech obviously slowed down a little bit. We have a little bit less work coming in. So it can range anywhere from maybe, 5 or 6 upwards to 15. Right now, I think it's somewhere in the middle of that. But yeah, it definitely ebbs and flows with the market.
And then does the timeline to complete that project, find a candidate for a role, also ebb and flow? What's kind of the average or range of the timeline?
Yeah, it definitely ebbs and flows a little bit. I think that also different clients have different needs and expectations. Sometimes if it can be more urgent, maybe the person who was previously in the role left and they need somebody to fill it as soon as possible. Other times there's a little bit more leeway. Searches, I think we aim to close them in around 12 weeks. Oftentimes they take a little bit longer than that. So maybe 3 to 6 months, I would say, is what we're looking at for a search. But they can be a lot shorter than that, and they can be a lot longer than that.
And what are the typical stages of a search if there is kind of a standard process?
Yeah, so each search we have to, before they start, either, a consultant will bring it in through a client. They might have a relationship with that client already, or however that works. And then, or, they might have to end up pitching. It might be more of a competitive role where other, executive search firms are pitching to do that role, and we end up winning that pitch. And sometimes, I'll help with the pitch slideshow. That's part of the analyst role, is doing some of that. But once we sort of win the search and kick it off, we'll, meet with the client, really understand what they're looking for, the necessary, the requirements for experience that they're looking for, the type of leader, other parameters around compensation, location, when they need the person to start, work out some of those logistics as well. And then we'll sort of work together internally to develop a search strategy, thinking about where we're going to look for this new leader, how we're going to be able to find people that check the most number of boxes that they're looking for in the job description for the requirements of the role. And then, from there, we'll start to identify people from those companies or with the background that they're looking for, and work with the client with actual profiles to say, what do you think of this person? We know them well. Like, we think really highly of them. They've done this, this, and this. Get some feedback on them to really calibrate on profiles. And then once we really have an idea of what they're looking for, my role and the folks who are in my role will be really focused on, doing all the research, building out a pipeline of potential candidates, and we'll begin reaching out to, potential candidates, having those early conversations. And once they're assessed by Spencer Stuart, we introduce them to the client. We provide an extensive write-up on why we think they're a strong candidate, and give them detail on their background and, any potential development areas or areas for them to probe a little bit more on. And then, we're consistently every week or every other week meeting with clients to show our progress, get their feedback on the different candidates that they're meeting. We're always keeping the pipeline growing, looking for new candidates, even as there are some in process, and, continuing to get feedback from them on the candidates that they're meeting. And then, keep going through that process, and eventually, as they go through their interview process with the candidates, eventually, hopefully get to a placement, we'll work with them to, figure out how to make an offer, provide some data and market feedback on what an offer should look like, and, work with the candidate and the client to eventually close an offer and, hopefully get to the end of the search.
Thank you for that overview. That I loved hearing each step of that, and along with the timeline too, to picture what you're doing. And it sounds like it's a very social role, from both talking with the clients, your internal team, and then screening potential candidates. What breakdown would you guesstimate is with people or on your own doing some of that market research?
Yeah, I would say that, my role is probably one of the more, relative to other roles in the company, the analyst role is a little bit more internal. Like, you're spending more time doing research, and you're spending a little bit more time working on different deliverables on your own compared to, say, a consultant or an associate. But even then, that's relative to what they're doing. I'd say I'm still spending at least half my time with people, at least, whether they're, internal. I'm speaking to my teams about, different searches or anything else that comes up, or speaking with clients or candidates, spending a lot of time on the phone either way. So, I would say about half my time is alone versus spent with others, and it's probably the most time spent alone of anyone who's in a client facing role at our company.
Only gets more social from there.
Yeah,
Start
exactly.
at 50 and go up. So probably
Yeah.
not the best role for someone very introverted. stay the analyst position. And then what
Yeah,
do you like about the role and find challenging?
I yeah, I mean, obviously that's a great question. I think that the best part about the role is the level of interaction that I get with so many incredible people on a daily basis. Many of the consultants at Spencer Stuart have done amazing things with their career before joining the firm. We have a lot of former CEOs, a lot of former executives at pretty large companies, and between the people I get to interact with internally and the clients and candidates that we get to meet, it's invaluable to connect with such fascinating people every day. And, I try not to take that for granted in this role, all the amazing people I get to meet and speak with. And then, the variety of the work is really engaging as well. Um, like I said before, I can have anywhere from, 5 or 6 to 15 projects at once. And having multiple searches at once really keeps my brain active. I'm learning more about the businesses and the functions and industries I'm working on every day. And I really enjoy the level of variety that I get working on different searches and having new ones come in. And for me, I think I prefer that to doing the same thing every day. I mean, challenges, I think that, we have really high standards for our work, and, Spencer Stuart has a strong reputation in the space. And so, you know, the job certainly requires a high level of attention to detail and organization, in addition to, the work ethic. Especially during our busier times, there's, you got to work hard, and it requires you're juggling a lot of balls at once, and you can't really drop any of them. And um, we are trying to uphold excellence every day. And so, of course, there's some pressure that comes with that, but overall, I think the rewarding nature of the work makes it worthwhile.
Fast-paced, dynamic, and collaborative work environment where it
Absolutely.
keeps you engaged, constantly learning. And yeah, they say if it's true that you're the average of the people you spend your time with, and you're spending most of your time with CEOs and executives, you're on your way, only only getting smarter every day.
That's the idea.
And then, do you have any advice for someone who hears about your role and wants to follow a similar path, or just general career advice?
Yeah, I think that the number one piece of advice I give to anyone who's interested in this space is don't be afraid to put yourself out there and make connections during your job search. Reach out to people who are people who are in the role that you'd want to do for sure, but also, people, more senior people at those companies, people who had been through that role and perhaps have, advanced to the next level. um, People are really happy, I found, to speak with, ambitious young people who are interested in them and what they do and how they got into the point where they're on in their career. And, they want to be able to share what they've done and help these people out. And so you can learn a lot about how people have gotten to where they are. There's always going to be advice that you can take away and apply to your own journey. And the connection can also go a long way, both in the short term and the long term. So expanding your professional network can never hurt. And learn as much from these people as you can as you speak to them. And then as you're starting to have conversations that are a little more formal, a little more, you're actually applying and you're interviewing. Um, Spencer Stuart and other firms like Spencer Stuart, it's a competitive field. And I think what we're really looking for is people who drive positive impact in their environments. Companies like Spencer Stuart are looking for people who take initiative and drive meaningful impact in their communities, whether it's through, their coursework, their internships, nonprofit or volunteer work, clubs and sports, anything else like that. Any way that you can really show that you are the type of person who takes initiative and really creates positive impact in your communities, that's really what's going to set you apart. And so um, I think figuring out ways to, articulate that and demonstrate that capability will go a long way in, setting yourself apart in a firm like this.
That's great advice, both starting with just talking to people, making those connections to figure out what you want, and then also building up your experience through all those routes so you can talk about it when it gets to that point when they finally get to talk with someone like you and for an interview, they'll be prepared for that. Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you, Heidi. I'm really glad to get the chance to share a little bit about Spencer Stuart and my role, and really nice to have the time together.